For a relatively new league, the NBA has produced a lot of great players. And what's more impressive is that even though the game of basketball has changed drastically over the past few years, it is still easy to identify great players strictly off of talent. However, as time continues to pass, more players will enter the league, and unfortunately, some of the older players will start to become underappreciated. One of those players, in my opinion, has to be Patrick Ewing. Now, Big Pat is extremely intriguing because even though, yes, he is identifiable to the casual fan, people know his name, the team he played for, the era he played in, for whatever reason, it still escapes a lot of people how great of a player he truly was. And to make it worse, it has nothing to do with his talents, but everything to do with the lack of context that is surrounding his career. And so hopefully in today's video, I can not only highlight how great of a player Ewing was, but also give you the proper context and perspective on his career. Patrick Ewing is a 7-foot big man who was drafted back in 1985 by the New York Knicks and basically spent his entire career in New York except for his last 2 years in the NBA when he played for Orlando and Seattle. Yeah, definitely going to overlook those 2 years in his career. While in New York, Ewing was quickly identifiable as one of the better rim protecting bigs the NBA has ever seen. So much so that his defense not only was a trademark for his style of play, but it also helped shape the identity for the New York Knicks moving forward, as New York was always one of the better defensive teams during the 90s. But what really separated Ewing from other great defenders is what he was able to produce on the offensive end. Throughout Ewing's prime, not only was he a great defender, but also a reliable scoring option, as he would routinely average 22 to 25 points to go alongside his 10 to 11 rebounds, 2 to 3 blocks, while shooting above 50% from the field. And Ewing was very influential in winning as well. To this day, the Patrick Ewing era was one of the most successful stretches in New York Knicks history, and Ewing had the ability to routinely lead New York to a 50+ win season, which of course would translate to a playoff berth, but also many people viewed New York as a title contending team, again in large part to do with Patrick Ewing's dominance. And even though that success never translated to a championship, as we all know, winning a ring isn't the end of the world. Because when it was all said and done, Ewing recorded over 24,000 points, over 11,000 rebounds, and nearly 3,000 blocks. To go alongside his 11 All-Star appearances, as well as being selected to 7 All-NBA teams and 3 All-Defensive teams, which was more than enough for him to be named a Hall of Famer, but quite frankly, just doesn't give the proper depiction of how great of a player he truly is. So, let's talk about his accolades. Now, on the surface, Ewing's resume is pretty impressive, or at least impressive enough to easily make an argument for him being one of the top 50 to 40 players of all time. However, it's still very misleading, and a lot of that just has to do with the flawed perception around All-NBA and All-Defensive teams. Now, many people, even some voters, reference the All-NBA teams as the top 15 players in the NBA. Unfortunately, that is incorrect. The All-NBA teams gives us the 6 best guards, 6 best forwards, and 3 best big men in the NBA on a year-to-year basis. And even though, yes, that does equate to 15 players, it's very important that we clarify that the All-NBA teams are primarily based on positions rather than talent. And Patrick Ewing fell victim to this throughout his entire career. Great examples of this are the 1994 and 1995 seasons, where Ewing, statistically speaking, had great years. And then when it comes to team success, Ewing was not only able to lead the Knicks to 55+ win seasons, but in particular to the 1994 season, the Knicks not only tied for the best record in the Eastern Conference, but also they tied with the 3rd best record in the league. And to go even further, in both 1994 and 1995, Patrick Ewing finished top 5 in the MVP race and still did not make an All-NBA team in neither one of those seasons. And it's just because systematically Ewing was at a massive disadvantage as a center, as well as the level of competition he had to face during the 90s with players such as Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, Brad Daugherty, and Alonzo Mourning. And it only gets worse when you look at all defensive teams. Statistically speaking, Ewing was a great defender. He was able to lead the Knicks to be one of the better defensive units in the NBA during the late 80s and 90s. And when you look at some of the Defensive Player of the Year races, there are years where Ewing is receiving Defensive Player of the Year votes, which basically means that there is an argument to be made that Ewing is the best defender in the NBA and still does not make an all-defensive team. Next, let's talk about winning. Now, personally, I have no problem at all criticizing Patrick Ewing for ending his career without a championship. I believe that is a fair assessment of who he was as a player and his ability and inabilities on the floor. However, with a little bit of context, not only is it fairly acceptable for Ewing to end his career ringless, but also you start to get a bit more appreciation for the rest of the success that Ewing saw throughout his career. Between 1989 to 1997, the New York Knicks had the 5th best win percentage in the NBA at 62.7%, which is not only averaging around 51 wins on a year-to-year basis, but also good enough to be a consistent playoff team, which is what the Knicks were during that 9-year stretch. Furthermore, not only did the Knicks consistently make postseason appearances, but also they only had one first-round exit during that time frame, and of course, 2 conference finals appearances, one of which translated to a finals appearance. Now, with that level of success, one would believe that there had to be another Hall of Famer in his prime playing alongside Patrick Ewing and aiding him in those wins. No. How about an All-NBA performer? Nope. What about perennial All-Stars? Nope. Well, you may say to yourself, this Knicks team was more of a defensive-oriented unit, so what about perennial all-defensive team players? Nope. Well, how about we just lower the bar to 20-point scorers? Not only did Patrick Ewing not play with any 20-point scorer during this time frame, but also during this 9-year stretch, the Knicks played 20 playoff series, and in all 20 of them, no one except for Patrick Ewing had the ability to average 20 points. Now, don't get me wrong, players have their roles, so I don't want to come across like Patrick Ewing played with some terrible team. However, to expect this unit to be a title contender, quite frankly, that means that they would either have to A, overachieve, or B, be heavily dependent on Patrick Ewing, or possibly a little bit of both. And so with that in mind, even though Ewing has gone down as one of the better players who have never won a championship, please keep in mind, unlike Charles Barkley, unlike Karl Malone, and unlike Steve Nash, Ewing never played with another all-time great. He never played with another All-NBA performer. Heck, he never played with anyone else who could give you 20 points on a night-to-night basis. And finally, let's look at the numbers, because statistically speaking, Ewing is one of the more impressive players the league has ever offered. However, I believe a lot of people overlook his numbers, in large part to do with them not coming close to a lot of his peers, but I'll talk about that later. Between 1990 and 1993, which I would argue are Ewing's peak years, he was averaging 25.6 points, 11 rebounds, 3 blocks, while shooting 51% from the field, and impressively enough, 75% from the charity stripe. But the season that stands out the most has to be in 1990, where Ewing averaged nearly 29 points, 11 rebounds, 4 blocks, while shooting 55% from the field and 77.5% from the free throw line. And at the end of his career, Patrick Ewing recorded 24,815 points, which is 23rd all time, 11,607 rebounds, which is 25th all time, and 2,894 blocks, which is 7th all time, which means that Big Pat is not only top 25 in 3 out of 5 major statistical categories, but if you go through NBA history, you'll realize that there's only 5 players who ended their career with over 24,000 points, 11,000 rebounds, and 2,500 blocks. Only 5, and Patrick Ewing is one of those players. But also on that list, and in some categories ahead of Patrick Ewing, you have his immediate competitors, such as Shaquille O'Neal and Hakeem Olajuwon, and honestly, that's where I believe a lot of the misconception and misunderstanding about Ewing's career really stems from. If we're being honest with ourselves, Ewing is just a victim of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. He played in a league that featured Michael Jordan, so winning a championship was already extremely difficult. Then add on top of the fact that he was on a roster that quite frankly just didn't have enough talent to truly compete on a year-to-year basis. And then you add on top of the fact that he played in an era that featured all-time great big men. So there's no real need for me to even make an argument that he was somewhat better or competitive or just as good as Shaq, Hakeem, or Robinson, because the truth is, he wasn't. But if you were to look at Ewing's career on its own, instead of immediately comparing it to other all-time greats, I think more people would appreciate what he brought to the table. And if we were to look at Ewing's career with a proper perspective and understand context, I genuinely believe that where he would rank all time, or at least how we depict him amongst other all-time greats, would significantly alter. But that's just my opinion. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. I do want to hear your thoughts on Patrick Ewing and where you rank him all time, because I do believe he is one of the more interesting players amongst other all-time greats. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button, notification bell, because the NBA season is right around the corner, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.